Kevin McCullough.
Welcome back to Times Square. It's that Kevin Show. All right, so kind of know my take on it. SNL may try to pillory it. There may be a lot of people that are saying this is dumb, this is stupid. Former angry congressmen that can't get reelected, they may go on Twitter and complain about it. But none of that means anything if there's genuinely a strategic interest in forging an alliance or acquiring Greenland. So what does it mean, and how can we find out a little bit more about what it's going to take? I am very honored to be able to welcome former U.S. Ambassador to Denmark, a business leader, an advocate for American strength, both at home and abroad, whether it's foreign policy, energy security, or protecting America's borders. Ambassador Amb Sands brings insight that very few can. Ambassador, it is great to have you. Thank you for being here.
It's my pleasure, Kevin. It's great to be with you.
This last weekend, they couldn't resist themselves over at NBC. They had to put Bowen Yang on as J.D. Vance and reenact the picture of him standing there in Greenland, kind of making him look like a buffoon and like he doesn't know what's going on. That's far from the truth. In fact, that's about as far away from the truth as you can get. Why is the administration so interested in pursuing an alliance of strategic nature with Greenland?
Well, Kevin, it really is the $6 million question, right? Why is President Trump doing this? And he's doing this because the status quo is not going to stay the way it is. It's unsustainable. The Greenlanders are going independent. Denmark is refusing to look at the actual what's happening on the ground. They are pretending that they're going to continue to be a kingdom with Greenland and the Faroe Islands. But Greenland has said, we don't want to be part of the kingdom. We want to be independent. Now, they are dependent on Denmark for about $600 million a year in a kind of welfare payment. But what Denmark hasn't done and cannot do because they can't afford to is develop Greenland. So they get the welfare payment, but it kind of keeps them at a much lower per capita GDP than Denmark itself. Greenland is not thriving. It's just kind of, struggling along.
Well, then enters kind of the king deal maker and kind of the king idea man as to how Greenland could be developed. And I know it's like, 57,000 residents? I mean, we have a whole host of cities that are bigger in terms of population. But geographically speaking, and from a security standpoint, this is a very significant location on the planet. And Trump, I'm thinking, is going to come to the table with lots of ideas about development, and then we're going to have some sort of security in exchange for that. How does it work? What does it look like? What do we have to overcome to get there?
Sure. Well, President Trump is very strategic. He's looking at the Western Hemisphere and saying, gee, the United States is not secure. We've got the Chinese owning basically our Panama Canal, the one we built with our treasure, but also our blood. He's looking at South and Central America, the Caribbean, saying, wait a second, China's the number one investor in South America and actually is the number one trading partner for many, many of these countries. China, Russia, Iran are in our Southern Hemisphere. And then we see Canada even being really very heavily influenced by the Chinese Communist Party. Things are not good. And so he's going to right this ship and he's going to make sure the United States is secure. How's he going to do it? Just like you said, through more trade. There's going to be development in Greenland if we do come to a deal, which I believe he will, and security. That American security guarantee is very powerful. And there's ways to do it, like a free association agreement, like Palau or Micronesia. And it's a COFA, a free association where they're independent countries, but they get the trade and the security agreement with the United States.
When we are looking at where they are geographically, and as former ambassador to Denmark, you've spent time in the upper echelons of the atmosphere of our planet. The North Pole and the Northern Passage are something that keeps coming up in conversation. Russia is actually deploying icebreakers to try to create greater access across the northern portion of the globe. But I think China has intentions for trying to stake out some claim to what's going on up there. Why is this kind of frozen Arctic region so important to those countries, and why should it be important to the U.S.?
Well, there's a whole lot in your question you just asked. First of all, there's the Northern Sea route, and it is controlled by Russia. They've elbowed their way into controlling it, and they do have their icebreakers. And China is working with Russia, and they cut off about 20% of the cost and time of transiting goods to Europe when they use that Northern Sea route. That is part of Trump's plan where he's looking at that. But China has declared itself a near Arctic nation in their 2018 paper called The Polar Silk Road. And there's a great book written by an author named Anne-Marie Brady, and it's called China as a Polar Great Power. And in it, she explains how the CCP looks at the world from the two poles, the Arctic and the Antarctic, the North and South Pole, how they want to control both poles. They look at the globe as a globe, not as, oh, here's China and we're going to spread out a little bit. No, they're looking very strategically. How do they control the trade routes? And I was just down in Lima, Peru, and visited this giant port, the biggest investment that the CCP's ever made in our US, in the Western Hemisphere, the Chancay port, a giant port for China to take the minerals and all of the treasure of South America and send it to China.
So it does come down, especially with China, to power and ultimately dominance in terms of what they want to see happen. What are our options? How do we protect our interest in the Arctic? Is Greenland part of that? Is this strategy part of the long-term strategy of Trump to basically tell China, no, we're not going to let you just do whatever you want?
Well, I think both are correct. So if you look at the map from the North Pole, and there's a great map created by the National Science Foundation right before I became ambassador. It's the most detailed satellite map ever made. And you can see there the giant armed Russian coast. It's much bigger than any other country's presence in the Arctic Circle. And then you see Canada, you see the US, and then you see Greenland. And Greenland is that key to blocking access to the US, but also in the event that the US needs to get to the aid of our allies in Europe. For instance, the giant GI-UK gap, and those are the seas around Greenland, Iceland, and the UK, thinking of Scottish Shetland Islands, the Faroe Islands of Denmark, all those giant seas where Russia and China are really freely and actively at work. Russia and China, there's the submarines, there's the cutting of the undersea cables that Russia does, and now China's also doing. So they're learning from each other, unfortunately, in their unbridled alliance between China and Russia. So President Trump sees the danger where the economic coercion by China, they tried to bring Greenland into their Belt and Road Initiative. The threats by Russia, how they pose, especially Denmark's very aware of the Russia threat. So all of that taken together, President Trump sees Denmark has this territory, Greenland, they can't afford to develop or defend. And President Trump says, okay, we're going to step in and we're going to do it. All
right, we're going to take a quick break.
Stick around for more of That Kevin. Next, That Kevin Show with Kevin McCullough.